either. I want to bring in the president's deputy national security advisor, Tony Blinken. Tony, thanks for being here. You said the White House has not had a chance to look at the proposal yet from Russia, but that you would welcome Assad giving up his chemical weapons in a verifiable way. So I just want to be clear here. If the Syrian regime is serious about this and would hand over the chemical weapons supply to international control, the U.S. would stand down from a strike?
Jake, we just saw the Russian proposal, and of course we're going to look at it carefully. And we'll talk to the Russians about it. And of course, at the end of the day, anything that involves Syria giving up in a verifiable manner its chemical weapons and having them destroyed would be a very good thing. That's the purpose of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that Syria can't use these weapons again. But just a couple of things. We know that over the past couple of decades, the international community has tried without success to get Syria to sign on to the Chemical Weapons Convention, something that virtually every other country on earth has signed on to. As recently as last week, Assad wouldn't even confirm that he had chemical weapons, never mind use them against his own people. And of course, we've worked with Russia, we've tried to work with Russia in recent months at the United Nations, and until now, every initiative we've tried, including on chemical weapons, has been blocked by the Russians. And it is a daunting task potentially to get a hold of all of these weapons in a verifiable manner, and you'd probably need a ceasefire. All of that said, we're going to look into this very carefully, but let's keep one thing in mind. The only reason this is even being discussed is because of the pressure we're exerting and the threat of the use of force. And so if Congress were to give us the authority to go forward, that would actually enhance any options that may exist for some kind of resolution. But if absent that authority, it's going to make it tougher.
Tony, I have to be honest. It seems to me that what happened today with Secretary Kerry is he engaged in a hypothetical, forgetting that as a Secretary of State, he's not supposed to engage in hypotheticals. And this was something of a gaffe, and the administration seems to be scrambling to take it seriously, perhaps pursuing what might be at least some sort of path of diplomacy, but it seems kind of like a mess up.
No, Jake, not at all. Again, we'll look and see what the Russians have in mind. We'll talk to them about it. And again, it's interesting because I think the only reason they put it on the table and the only reason the Syrians may have paid some lip service to it is precisely because we're threatening to use force. And it's very important now that Congress give us that authority. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be talking about this.
So, Tony, you saw the poll numbers that CNN released today. Widespread disapproval of the president's handling of the situation, opposition to strikes against Syria. Although the American people seems largely convinced that Assad did use chemical weapons against its own people. Tony, the American people don't want you to do this.
So here's what's going on. You know, when the American people hear they read in a headline or they hear in a brief news flash the possibility of using a military force in Syria to deal with the chemical weapons problem, what they're thinking about, the frame they process it through, is the last decade. A war with Iraq, a war with Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of American troops involved. What we need to do, and what we've been doing with members of Congress, and what the President, I'm sure, will do tomorrow night, is make it clear what this is and what this isn't. What this is a limited, targeted, but we believe effective action to deal with the chemical weapons problem. What it is not, it's not open-ended, it's not boots on the ground, it's not Afghanistan, it's not Iraq, it's nothing like that. It is not taking the country to war. As the American people understand that and understand how important it is for us to stand up to enforce the prohibition against using chemical weapons, I think they'll get behind it.
No, but the American people, I think, understand that that's what you're saying, but they've been through enough military involvements that were supposed to start off small that ended up not being small. They're being skeptical based on historical awareness.
I'm not sure that they have had a chance to really understand that. Again, most of this has been in a quick headline or news flash. The President will speak to the American people tomorrow night, and he'll have a chance to lay out before them exactly what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. At the same time, members of Congress have been spread all across the country during summer recess. They're coming back just now. They're getting to look at the intelligence. They're getting to see the case. It's compelling. It's overwhelming. And then they basically have to make a decision. They have to decide whether we're going to do something or not about Assad gassing his own people, including hundreds of children.
I want to play something that Assad said in an interview with CBS's Charlie Rose.
How can you talk about what happened if you don't have evidences? We're not like the American administration. We're not social media administration or government. We are the government that deal with reality. Well, when we have evidences, we will announce.
I don't like agreeing with Assad, but he's right. The American people have seen no evidence tying the chemical weapons attack directly to Assad. And Tony, certainly you understand, for many of us, it's not enough for the U.S. government to say, trust us, the intelligence tells us what we're saying it does. Please just believe us. I mean, you get that.
Jake, two things. First, the president will have an opportunity tomorrow night to lay out the case that we're making. And we've been doing that in a classified setting with members of Congress who were back in town last week. And when they read it, when they see it, when they're able to ask questions on it, they come away convinced. I think there's very little doubt when you talk to members of Congress who've gotten the intelligence briefings. And here's the deal. They're the elected representatives of the American people. They're the ones who get this information and then have to make a judgment representing their constituents.
But I want to, Tony, you're saying that President Obama tomorrow night, when he addresses the nation, he will provide some more information about why it is that in all these classified briefings, people say that this was Assad acting or his regime acting, and we're going to get more information on that subject?
I think he'll be able to lay out in a very compelling way exactly what we know, and he'll be able to give you some idea of how we know it, without obviously getting into the classified details, which we can't do because you have the question of putting in jeopardy sources and methods and making it harder to do this going forward. But, Jake, what we do know, and what we've already put out, and what the president will be able to talk about tomorrow night, is we know that there was an attack on August 21st using chemical weapons, and we now have evidence that sarin was used. We know where the rockets were launched from, an area controlled by the government. We know where they landed, an area controlled by the opposition that Assad was trying to clear out for weeks on end. We have an extraordinary volume of social media reports, the videos that many Americans are seeing for the first time in the last day or so on their television screens. We have eyewitness accounts. We have doctors, NGOs, hospital workers. It is a compelling, overwhelming case. It's beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, Deputy National Security Advisor Tony Blinken, thank you as always for your time and your views.